to Lard TV, and today we're doing something a bit different with a build project where we're looking to build a Roman marching fort, or at least part of it. One of the things that I've been playtesting for Infamy is attacks on fortifications, and as a result I decided that I would like to have at least a section of a fort with a wall in a manner that could be put together in various ways, and a gateway and an external ditch. Really something that I wanted to be able to use multi-purpose, so it could either be a Roman temporary fort, or it could be a wall on a Gallic oppidum or one of their fortified towns, or at least a village. So I wanted something that was multi-purpose. I had a look online. It's possible to buy Roman marching forts in 28mm scale for about 150 quid in resin, but that was not what I wanted to pay, and so I thought I'd try and do something myself. And really just using some material that I had knocking around, that's what we have done today. So let's have a look at how we went through that process, starting with planning. The first stage in the process was to decide what the profile of the model was going to be. Obviously I wanted to have a raised area of ground on which we're going to have a rampart, and in front of that a ditch. Modelling ditches is quite problematic on a wargames table, which obviously you can't route out or dig into. So the way I was going to do that was to have a raised frontal lip with a ditch behind that. Obviously the raised ramparts were going to have to be wide enough to take a base, a sabot base of figures. So I was looking at a depth of around 2 inches there. So that really determined the way the profile was going to be. Now, clearly the next phase was going to be to work out dimensions. I decided that the rear slope would probably take out about 1 inch. Then the raised rampart area, which was going to have to take, as we said, a 2-inch deep base approximately. So I allowed 2¼ inches for that to allow for the ramparts as well. Then the slope down in front of the ramparts was going to be another inch, which then, if we allowed another bit of space for the ditch and the lip at the front, we were looking at a total base size of approximately, well, precisely in this case, 6 inches. So then I wanted to work out exactly how what the dimensions were going to be in terms of width. We knew the base was going to have to be 6 inches from back to front. So the first thing I did was to plan a gate. I decided that I wanted the gate to be wide enough to take a 4-inch sabot base of figures. So that meant I wanted to allow there approximately 4½ inches to give a bit of wiggle room for getting troops through that gate. Then alongside that I was going to create sections of rampart. I decided on a 5-inch frontage was going to give me the most flexible frontage there. Then once I put the 2 bits to the side, I thought, well, actually, do I need to build that gateway? Possibly the best way to do that is going to be to leave that open. So I decided to remove that section. So there we got 2 5-inch wide sections. So we had another 2 5-inch wide sections there. That means with our gate, our frontage there is going to be 24½ inches. Now we're getting to the point there where, you know, that's going to dominate fairly any table. And then we've got to have 2 corners. Now, corners obviously are going to have the same frontage as they have depth, because the layout is going to be going round a corner. So allowing for them being 6 inches wide a piece, that was going to mean that we were going to have a frontage there of 32 inches plus the gate, so 36½ inches at maximum. So that's going to be a very, very substantial piece of fortification. But the idea being that I could have it deployed like that, or with the shoulders, if you like, turned back in, and that would give us a frontage of 26½ inches, which is approximately half a table. So it's still going to be imposing enough, and we could get a few tents in there to get it looking like a proper encampment rather than just a wall. So that was the planning done. With that done, I grabbed a piece of 8mm MDF, which I had hanging about. When we had the workshop insulated, they used 8mm MDF to skin the walls with the insulation trapped in between. So I had quite a bit of that knocking about. So I got a piece of that and I drew it up, as we can see here, basically. Drawing on it where the slopes are going to be at the back, and then where the slopes are going to be at the front, and the area in front of that was going to be the ditch and the lip. So with that drawn up, I was ready to go. I found a piece of 1-inch deep high density polystyrene. This stuff used to be blue, they're now doing it in grey. And you can see what I've done here is I've marked on here the 4¼ inch section, which is going to be the rear slope, the raised section, and then the front slope, the ditch we were going to do separately. So that was what I needed to cut out. I did that with a hot wire cutter, although to be honest with you, it's all straight line cuts. I used to use a bread knife for cutting polystyrene, and I think I might well have got a better result using that. But anyway, I used the hot wire cutter because I've got it, and then cut it into sections using a fine tooth general saw, the type of saw that a carpenter would use, and then stuck that in place using a hot glue gun. You can see that the where the edges come together, it's imperfect, but to be honest with you, you're going to get imperfections, and when the whole thing's covered in sand and a bit of grass, it's really not going to notice. So there we are. You can see half of a section there. You can see where the gates are, that I've actually just sliced off the corners slightly to allow a bit of an entrance to the defile there. But that is from left to right, obviously the corner section, and then 2 of the 5-inch sections going in. I used 4mm wooden doweling for the fence. To be honest with you, I nearly ran out and ended up adding cocktail sticks to the mix, which are pretty much identical in size and are actually perfect because you just cut them in half, and the spikes on each end then are excellent for just shoving straight into the high density polystyrene. But for the most part, I used this doweling because I had it in the workshop. Cut that to about 1¼ inch, allowing for the fact that 1/4 inch was going to be in the polystyrene, whilst the inch of the palisade was going to be a nice high wall with a 28mm figure behind it, which is obviously, by the time it's based, and the fact that the measurement is normally to eye level, is going to be 32mm. So it was going to be a really imposing wall. I wanted this to look slightly irregular because A, I wanted the fort to do for Romans but also for barbarians, and B, I just think it looks more attractive than having a completely regular wall. So I decided to go for the thematic rather than the literal interpretation of a Roman drill manual. First of all, I used a sharp knife to carve a slight sort of trench along the front of the raised area, and that was only about a couple of millimetre wide, just in cutting a V shape with a sharp craft knife to allow housing for the doweling. Then I used PVA glue, which is much better than super glue for this. I did think about using a hot glue gun, but to be honest with you, by the time you got it in there, you would then be having to get your doweling in very rapidly. And what I wanted to do was use some cotton to create a reinforcement roughly along the centre of the each stake in the palisade. So you can see what I did here was I used a reel of cotton. I put the doweling in at a slight angle. That allowed me to wrap the cotton around it and then pull that tight, and that stood up to create a nice wall. The whole process was tedious rather than difficult, but it wasn't too bad. I guess about an hour to maybe 2 hours to do the whole thing, so it's an opportunity to listen to a book on Audible or listen to one of your favourite hobby podcasts. But you can see the net result there, where we've got our Legionaries behind the wall. So it incorporates the base, which was one of the key design features that I wanted, and I don't think it looks too shoddy. Next was a ditch. I could have done this with PVA, but I decided I was just going to use hot glue. I buy glue sticks in bulk on the internet, and consequently they're pretty cheap material. And one of the things they're quite good for is for building up terrain. And what I've done here is I've used 3 lines, the first 2 side by side to just create a sort of wider base, and then the third one going over the top to make, if you like, a triangle of 2 runs of hot glue and then a third one on top, which gives us a relatively reasonable bump, which we can then cover in a while. Also, I ran hot glue along the backs of the palisade and along the front. This really does hold it in position. It's not going anywhere. The PVA glue that we used earlier really was effectively just to tack it in place, but it's this hot glue that's now holding it in place. I ran over that front and back with a hot glue gun and then used a damp cloth very quickly while it was still pliable to smooth that down to a smooth finish. Where the gate was going to go, I cut a slight recess into the high density polystyrene, and then I put the supporting posts there. These are the posts on which we're going to have a fighting platform above the gate, and I wanted to make them just high enough so they cleared the fence, and they would then be stuck into position there. Obviously I measured that carefully, and then once I'd cut it and came to do it, it was the wrong height, but I wasn't too worried about that because I'm actually going to cover that up anyway. So I just used a hot glue gun to get those posts into position there. What I did then was I used some cornflake packet, cereal packet cardboard, which is absolutely perfect for creating planking on models. It's got a bit of flexibility in it, and as you can see, I just basically sloshed a load of PVA on there, put that planking in place, which covers up any errors in terms of the height of those support posts, and then use some matchsticks, which craft matchsticks, which I had in the shed, to put them up as reinforcing posts, and again slap PVA over the whole thing, and that goes pretty much rock hard. PVA is very much the terrain modeller's friend. The next stage was to use interior quality quick drying polyfiller to cover up that front of the ditch, just to get a more smooth finish than the 3 wiggly lines. And then once that dried, just polish it up with a damp finger, with water on the finger, just to get a more smooth finish. That will get the look that we're looking for. The last phase in the build is going to be putting the texture on the ground. Now for this I always use sharp sand for all my basing, but here what I've done is I've sieved it, so we've got the rocks in one bit and we've got the sand in the other bit. The reason I've done that is I want a slightly different effect depending on where we're putting it. So I'm going to use the fine sand initially to cover the bottom of the ditch and the walkway on the ramparts. So you can see here, this is where the sand, the fine sand, has been applied. Once that's done, I mix in the stones back into the sharp sand, so mix it all back in, and then put that more rocky mix on the front and rear of the rampart and the front of the ditch. That difference in texture will just create a slightly different look when we have the model finished, and especially in the ditch it will allow us to create a feeling of a little bit more depth. Once that's done and we've got all the sand and rocks in place, we can coat that in PVA and then add a coat of bitter chocolate exterior paint, which becomes the base for the painting that we're going to do. Now, with that done, and while that dries, carry on and have a look at the creating the fighting platform for over the gate. Now, as you can see here, I've used a sabot base to make sure that the supports are the right distance apart, and that's then allowed me to measure up a base. I'm using plastic card here. I really would have preferred to have used artist mounting board at this stage, but as we're in lockdown, I couldn't acquire any, so I had some plastic PVC in, which I've used that for the base, and then I've used balsa wood for the walls, and I'm going to be using matchsticks to create the outside look, if you like, of that. What I've done is I glued that together with PVA, really just to tack it in place, and then used a hot glue here on the underside, avoiding the corners, which of course is where our supports are going to go. And that is going to create a pretty strong and rigid structure. As you can see, since we last saw this, what I've done is I have painted it in a Santex, bitter chocolate, an external paint, which is a really good base for pretty much any terrain. It is a dark earthy colour, which means we can then dry brush up from that to get the colour we want. What it's also done is it's obviously served as a decent undercoat for the wooden breastworks there. Now, what I did after putting this, covering this with the two grades of sand, is I covered the whole thing in PVA, and that allowed it to dry overnight, and it's pretty much gone solid. So we're going to start now by painting this up. Now, what I like to do there is use domestic household paints. Because we're in lockdown, it's a case of seeing whatever is out there. That one's dried up, so we won't be using that one. But I've got a couple of these creamy colours, which hopefully you can see there, which I'm just going to use with a large 1-inch flat-headed brush to take some of the bitter chocolate and then add the cream colour in. And what we're trying to do here is, rather than present a complete contrast, we're trying to work our colours in together and then just dry brush that up to get colours that complement. And what we're going to do is avoid as much as possible that ditch, because we want to again provide a bit of a contrast there with the way the ground is looking there. Doesn't matter if we go over a bit onto the wooden spikes. We don't need to do the sides, obviously, and we're just literally dry brushing that on quite roughly. We don't want too much coverage. It's an opportunity, if you get any bits of the shine through where the first coat of the brown base coat hasn't taken, you can cover up any gaps in that. So as you can see, it's a pretty rough process, but it does highlight any of those rocks, which is going to give us a nice degree of contrast. Now here, where we've got the woodwork, I'm actually going to do that all over there as well, because it's not a bad base colour for wood. We're going to use some slightly different colours to highlight that up as we go forward, but at this early stage, that is a good colour to use. Okay, and I'm going to carry on working through all of these, and we'll come back and have a look once I put this first highlight on. Okay, so with that initial dry brush on, what I'm going to do is add a bit more of our light colour. As you can see, we're just highlighting that up. Some areas we're leaving a little bit darker in that trench, so I'm not actually focusing on the trench. If I run over it, doesn't matter. And obviously the walkway is going to be well trodden. Another go over with some more of the light paint. So you can see we've gone from the original brown right the way through to something very light indeed. And I'm just going to apply this quite gently and quickly. Just to pick up those stones, pick up the main area of traffic. I'm not going to do it on the back, well actually I will do, bollocks. But I don't want to, I really just did that quite gently. So picking up those stones, and again the area where it's going to be harder ground where the sentries are walking. And you can see on this we're getting a contrast between the ditch and earth that's been piled up. I'm not speeding this up because I just want you to see how quickly this gets done. There's no point in taking much time over this. So a good brush on the front, a light brush on the raised area there, a heavier brush on the walkway for the compacted earth, and then just a light brush on the back slope. And all in all, those are pretty much done and ready for grass, but we want to do something with the stakes. Now I'm going to go, because this is a bit more detailed work, I'm actually going to use a Vallejo here, and this is a green-brown, which I'm going to use with a slightly smaller brush. I don't know what that is, ½ inch. But I'm still going to allow some of the paint that I had previously to be mixed in with that, because we want that continuity as the colours blend. And I'm going to take that and put that over our, a bit heavy there, but then I'm going to put that over our stakes in the front of that palisade. Alright, so as we can see, we've got a pretty decent stab at earth, but the final paint step is to use one of my favourite paint colours, which is Vallejo Stone Grey. Now this is a slightly criminal use for Vallejo paints doing this, but this is a great little colour which you can dust on at the end of any project over everything, and that kind of ties it all in together. So I'm going to use the big brush again, and I'm going to kind of work it about to get it as medium dry, and just put that over everything, including the trench, but really, really lightly and gently. This kind of gives it a feel of a general layer of dust over everything, which rather like when you varnish a figure, sometimes that it's only at that phase that all the colours actually tie in together, and that is what this achieves. And that's it. There we have our painted sections, looking suitably worn and rough and ready. But what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be adding grass and maybe some tufts, but I think more grafts on this to really finish off. And also we're going to be working on getting that tower for over the gateway finished. Okay, what we're going to do now is apply some static grass. I was thinking about tufts, but to be honest with you, I don't want this to really look like it's been around forever. So I know you do get tufts come up before grass, but visually I think the grass is going to look better. So I'm just going to start off by putting in some PVA around the top of the slope, and then some on more open areas to suggest new growth. Put it around the edges here, so that's where it's going to blend in with the tabletop, and maybe a little bit on the front of the ditch, and then just really for visual purposes I'm going to put some tufts of grass springing out there, and then more on the back slope, again concentrating at the bottom where it's going to meet the table, and creeping up where the grass has climbed up, and that we'll give that a go and see how that comes out. I'm just going to put it in this box of flock mix that I make up, and we'll tap that off, probably a bit quick, but never mind. For now, you can see we've got some glue showing through there, but for now I think that should give a fairly good rendition of a recently dug Roman fortification that is starting to get returned to nature. So I'm going to do the rest. I'll give that one a chance to dry, and then we'll come back and have a look at it on the tabletop when it's done. So there we are, that's our Roman fort all completed and on the tabletop. All in all, total cost $0, basically because I just made it out of bits and pieces that I had to hand. But I guess if you were going to go out and buy the MDF sheet, you'd be looking at about £5 by the amount of polystyrene that I bought, maybe another £4. Sand, almost nothing. Paint, almost nothing. Glue, almost nothing. So the whole thing, if you had to go out and buy the pieces, I guess the downing would be maybe another £4. So certainly less than 15 quid for the whole lot, which is a lot cheaper than 150. In fact, it's a 90% discount. So that's our build project from Lard TV for today. Come back and check what we're doing if you like what we've done. Don't forget to click below. If you don't like, well, there you go. And if you've got any questions, don't hesitate to ask them. We always like to check and answer any questions that we have. So there we go, Roman fort for Infamy, and hopefully we'll be showing you that in action on the tabletop on Lard TV before very long. So for now, keep safe, and we hope to see you soon.